A very interesting take in today's Montreal Gazette, an editorial written by former Westmount Mayor Peter Trent. You'll know his name. He's been involved, of course, in so many different things, including, I believe, Peter, one of the most awarded books on Canadian politics. Did I get this right? You won the first for Best Canadian Political Book of 2012 at the time?
I was a finalist.
Finalist?
Out of 5.
Oh, that's pretty good.
That's impressive.
Listen, I want to talk about this column because it kind of comes, in a sense, out of nowhere, but it comes in the wake of the Montreal budget having been introduced a couple of weeks ago. You make the case, or try to make the case in this column, suggesting we are, bottom line, and correct me if I'm wrong, you think we are simply paying our elected politicians here, municipally, too much money. Is that fair?
Yes, that's a fair statement. And I'm saying it partially because we pay our municipal employees, the 23,000 who work for the City of Montreal, 50% more than the rest of the public sector and the private sector. So what they're really doing is saying, well, we may be, one-third more than our employees, but they fail to mention that their employees are actually way overpaid themselves. So the average pay, including benefits, and by the way, you have to include benefits when you're comparing public and private salaries, because private salaries have very poor pensions. Public salaries have very big pensions. So in my calculations, I've included the cost of the pensions to the point that some people who work for the City of Montreal are figuratively millionaires because when they retire, they will get a very, very handsome pension. So this is why I've added the pension costs and the benefits to those numbers. But including that, the average Montreal elected official is making $165,000 a year. And keep in mind, some of those jobs should technically be part-time.
Okay, I want to stop you right there. And for people who didn't just hear that, that is the average that they are making, right? So you're factoring people making a lower, but some people you say are making up to $260,000 a year.
Yes. There is a limit, but they're at that limit. And that doesn't include extra pay for sitting on the board of the STM,
right,
the CMM, and j'en passe, as they say in French. So, but still, I'm just talking about what the City of Montreal is paying them is $165,000 a year. And had they not got rid of their increase after a very, very small scandal erupted when it was discovered that the mayor spent $2,000 for 12 people when she was in Vienna, which to me is pretty. I don't get terribly upset about that. But the point is, once that became public, then all of a sudden the 11% increase they wanted to give themselves, which would have raised their total remuneration from $165,000 to $181,000 a year. They just scotched it. They said, "Oh no, I guess we better not go." It doesn't look too good. So they scotched the increase. So they're still at $165,000, including benefits, but I maintain that is still extremely high.
So let's talk about this whole idea of people getting elected and why it is you would want to go into municipal politics, and the fact that you say in your column you shouldn't look at this as a career. This is a job, and explain why.
Well, I may be idealistic, but I still think that running for election, whether it's municipal, federal, or provincial politics, is something you're doing to give back to your community. And therefore, I don't think you should be doing it in order to get a very high salary. And don't forget, $165,000, that is much higher than most Montrealers get, clearly. So my view is you should be doing this to give back to the community. You should get a stipend that's reasonable. And as I point out in my article, the people who run McGill University, the Board of Governors, they get paid nothing. So there are examples where people do indeed want to give back to the community, or they sit on foundations, they get paid nothing. So I think that from that extreme to the other, where you get paid such a generous amount, I think it's inappropriate. And people are probably not running for the right reasons. I think people should run to give back to the community and do it as a public service. Yes, they should get a certain amount of money because, of course, even as a Montreal councillor, it's still a fairly onerous job. But I just don't think it justifies that kind of money.
I agree with you that there should be, in an ideal circumstance, that you feel the call, you feel the pull to public service, and that's what drives you to do it. But the whole impetus here in paying people better is to attract higher caliber candidates, right? And with the mindset also that perhaps it'll prevent them from being tempted to take kickbacks of any sort, right? So in order to get people from the private sector, rather interested in the public sector, that's what has driven these salaries up. So do you see the sense in that, or we need to just cast that aside?
I think I can see the attraction in theory. After being first elected in 1983, I can tell you I'm not convinced. In practice, it works. For many, I think that the idea somehow you pay more and you'll get a better quality of politician. I haven't seen much evidence of that in my long career as a politician. In fact, you could argue the reverse. But the real argument I would make is that we are now paying top dollar, right? At $165,000. I hope people agree that's really top dollar.
But
are we really getting a very high quality politician? I don't know. I'll leave that up to Montreal electors to decide.
Natasha, you're trying to make the point that if you were in the private sector, you could make that kind of money or more?
You could make way more than that in the private sector.
But you'd have to be qualified for a specific job in the private sector to make that kind of money. These are just people working for the city that don't have any specific qualifications, right?
I want to make it clear.
You want to run for office, you can run for office. That's what you make if you win.
Sure. And I want to make it clear. I do believe that they are overpaid. I think so. And as you recall in our last conversation with the mayor, I was like, why are we being asked to tighten our belts? And yet the city doesn't feel like they have to do. It's a do as I say, not as I do scenario.
I think that the other argument, Sasha, if I may say, is the following. If you're 25 years old, $165,000 a year is a huge amount.
Huge.
If you were in business and you made $2 million a year, it's a very small amount. My problem is we're paying the same amount to everybody, regardless of their background. That's really my point. Yeah. And so, if we are, in some respects, and sort of my tongue is partially in my cheek, what we should be doing is paying what the market says you're worth. So if when you were in the private sector you were making $200,000, maybe there would be a limit. Fine, but it's what you were making before would determine what you got as an elected official. Now, I said my tongue is partially in my cheek, but there's certain logic to that. Because right now we pay people, regardless of their background, regardless of their education, regardless of their experience, the same amount of money.
You know, I wonder, it takes nothing to, as I'm kind of trying to answer as well to Natasha's point, it takes nothing to get elected somewhere, right? If you can get yourself elected, regardless of your qualifications, other than being a good campaigner or politician to get elected in the first place, you're basically in, and you're in for a while. And a lot of people think, certainly with provincial politicians, you do your 4 or 5 years, and then you can walk away, you get a pension, as you alluded to, off the top for life, which in and of itself doesn't seem fair or right.
I agree. You're making my point for me, Aaron.
I just wonder then, people get into this and say, well, I'm doing this because of, I want this to be my career. You're suggesting that's not even, it shouldn't be a viable option.
No, I mean, I really deplore the fact we now have professional politicians at 3 levels of government. We never had that before, but now we do. And of course, even Pierre Poilievre is a professional politician. Justin Trudeau, I don't know what you would say what he did before he was a politician, but anyway, you can argue that's really all he's done. And I don't think that's what we should be looking for. We should look for people who have actually had experience in real life, public or private, and then they go into politics because they at least have some knowledge about how the world actually operates. But those who go into politics starting at university and then once they get out of university immediately get elected, they have no idea what's going on in the real world. Nothing.
And what's interesting too is that politicians these days, I feel like they don't understand that they were elected to serve the citizens, to put their best interests forward. I feel like most politicians come at it these days with their own agenda. So can we agree we're just not getting the kind of politicians that we really need?
I agree with that. And one of the problems with the whole merger and the creation of the megacities is that we actually have a lot more of this than we had before. Because tradition in some of the smaller municipalities, even up places like LaSalle, which was originally an independent municipality, they wouldn't pay their people terribly much, their elected officials. They were their neighbors. Their people said, okay, it's my turn to run the show for a while. I've got a lot of experience in business, or I've been a doctor, or I've been whatever, and I want to help my city get better, and I want to get in there, but I don't want a huge amount of money for it. That was the tradition we had, and that was kicked out the window, of course. Once you created the megacity, when it became, you created 103 elected officials to run the show, plus all the other ones that are running the small municipalities that thankfully demerged. So it's become, let's say, rather crowded. And certainly I find the actual salaries are well beyond what we used to pay when these municipalities were smaller. And I'm not too sure if they are as effective, but most of all, I'm not even sure whether we are getting value for our money.
I will ask you one last thing because we have like 30 seconds to wrap up. Do you ever think we can find ourselves going back, at least in Montreal, to where we were before the whole forced merger?
No, I don't think that's possible because, unfortunately, because of the whole demerger mess, where the rules were not really fair, and those cities like Saint Laurent clearly wanted to demerge, weren't allowed to. We have only a small number of municipalities, certainly population, that have demerged. And so the old structure with the MUC, which worked beautifully, where the suburban mayors had a equal vote with the city of Montreal, that's all gone. And so you have this bizarre agglomeration council, which is extremely undemocratic. So I don't know, Aaron. I think it would be lovely if we could. But at this point, it's a sort of an amalgam that is really the worst of both worlds.
Peter Trent, former mayor of Westmount. And this is going to be the basis for my question coming up just after 4 o'clock. Peter, thank you so much. Appreciate having you on today.
Thank you very much.